He never expected the weight of his family's name to feel so suffocating. To the outside world, Daniel Whitmore was untouchable, an heir to one of the wealthiest families in New York. He had money, power, and influence. Every magazine cover painted him as the ideal bachelor. Every socialite whispered his name with envy. Yet behind the iron gates of the Whitmore estate, secrets festered, secrets that were about to collide with his carefully curated world. It began with her. Althea was not someone Daniel was supposed to notice. She was quiet, graceful, and hardworking, moving through the marble hallways of the mansion with the humility of someone who knew her place in the eyes of others. But Daniel saw more. He saw the resilience in her eyes, the way she carried dignity even when addressed coldly, the way she smiled softly when no one was watching. She was different, and in a world of pretense and empty faces, that difference pulled him closer. The nights were long in that house. After the last glass of champagne was washed, after the last laugh of his elite guests faded into the dark, Daniel often found himself wandering downstairs. And there she was, cleaning, folding, humming songs from a past he never knew but felt in his bones. At first it was conversation. A question here, a laugh there. She spoke with honesty, never rehearsed, never careful to impress. Slowly, one night blurred into the next until he was standing too close, saying things he couldn't take back. One evening, when the weight of his loneliness pressed too hard, he reached for her hand, and she didn't pull away. Their relationship was secret, cloaked by shadows and silence. To Daniel, it was a rebellion against the life dictated for him. To Althea, it was complicated, because in her world, nothing was without consequence. But in those moments, they were just two people, stripped of status and walls, until the day came when the truth could no longer be hidden. Althea was carrying his child. For Daniel, the news was a storm. He had never felt both terror and awe collide so fiercely. A child meant permanence. A child meant a future he hadn't planned. For Althea, it was heavier still. She had always been careful, aware of the stories whispered about women like her, women whose voices were erased when entangled, with men of wealth and whiteness. Fear gnawed at her, but so did the undeniable truth. This life growing inside her was hers, no matter what. When Daniel finally told his mother, Eleanor Whitmore, the air in the room grew sharp. Eleanor had built her life on silence and control. Her gaze was steel, her voice precise. But when the words slipped from Daniel's mouth, "Althea is pregnant with my child," a flicker crossed her face. Not anger, not disgust, but something else. Something he couldn't name. "Daniel," she said slowly, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles turned white. "There are things about this family you do not know. Things I've kept buried for decades. If you bring this child into the light, everything we are, everything we built, will crack." Daniel stared at her, confused, defiant. "Mother, I love her, and I will not abandon my child." Eleanor closed her eyes as if fighting a memory too painful to surface. "You think you were protecting her, but you don't understand. This is not just about you or Althea. It is about blood, about history, and it will destroy you. But secrets cannot stay silent forever." Days stretched into weeks, and the estate's walls began to close in. The staff whispered, his business partners asked questions, and the world that once bowed to him now watched with suspicion. And Althea bore the brunt of it. Glares when she walked into the kitchen. Cold words from those who once ignored her. Daniel tried to shield her, but privilege cannot erase centuries of prejudice. He felt powerless for the first time. Then came the night Eleanor finally broke. Daniel found her sitting in the old study, a glass of brandy trembling in her hand. Her voice cracked when she spoke. "You think you are the first Whitmore man to fall for a black woman? You think this story hasn't been written before?" She leaned forward, eyes wet with something Daniel had never seen in her, regret. "Your father, he did the same, and it is why you exist." The words slammed into Daniel with the force of a hurricane. His father, the man who raised him in silence and absence, had lived this same story. Eleanor's confession spilled like water breaking a dam. His father had once loved a woman like Althea. Not in shadows, but openly, defiantly. But the family, the society, crushed them both. The woman vanished, her child erased from records. And Eleanor? She had been the replacement, the woman who married him to preserve a name, not a love. Daniel's chest burned with rage and grief. Everything he thought he knew about his life, his family, his very bloodline, was built on lies. And now the cycle was threatening to repeat. Althea entered quietly, her hand resting on her belly, sensing the storm inside him. Daniel turned to her, his voice breaking. "This isn't just about us. It never was. My family's shame runs deeper than I ever knew. But I swear I will not let them destroy you or our child." Eleanor's tears slid down her face. "You think love is enough? You think courage will protect you from the same cruelty that destroyed your father? Daniel, the truth has a way of eating men alive." But Daniel no longer cared about the empire, the name, or the wealth. He cared about the woman who stood beside him and the child who would soon take their first breath in a world that already wanted them unseen. He realized then, to break the cycle, he would have to destroy the very foundation his life was built upon. And as dawn broke over the Whitmore estate, the man who once had everything now stood at the edge of losing it all. Because for the first time, he was choosing dignity over legacy, love over wealth, truth over lies. The days after Eleanor's revelation felt like walking through shattered glass. Daniel replayed her words over and over. "Your father." He did the same, and it is why you exist. He had built his identity on the certainty of privilege, yet now he questioned every memory, every piece of affection that had seemed conditional, every cold stare that had followed him since childhood. Was he the son of a marriage built on lies? Was he himself the secret they had all agreed to bury? The mansion no longer felt like home. Its chandeliers, portraits, and marble floors seemed like monuments to hypocrisy. He looked at his mother differently, at the legacy differently. And Althea, carrying their child, stood in the crosshairs of a storm bigger than either of them had imagined. Whispers spread fast. First it was the staff, glances exchanged in the hallway. Then the board members, cautious but firm. A man of Daniel's standing was not supposed to complicate his future with scandal. A maid, black and unmarried, was a scandal in their eyes. At a charity dinner, an old family friend leaned across the table and murmured, "For your own good, son, handle it quietly. Pay her off. It's been done before." Daniel's jaw clenched until he thought his teeth would crack. Althea endured more cruelty. The kitchen, once her domain of quiet dignity, became a battlefield of sharp tongues. The other staff distanced themselves, afraid of losing their own jobs. Some mocked her under their breath. Others simply froze her out. And outside the estate, the city began to buzz with rumors. Her name was whispered as though she were a problem, not a person. But she walked tall, her hand always over the life inside her, determined not to be broken. Daniel saw her strength and felt both admiration and shame. Admiration because she carried herself with pride in a world that tried to erase her. Shame because he realized he had lived, oblivious to a system that crushed women like her every day. For years he had benefited from silence. Now silence was no longer an option. One night, when the weight became unbearable, Daniel confronted his mother again. He found Eleanor in the same study where she had confessed. She was staring at an old photograph, her fingers trembling around its frame. "Who is she?" Daniel demanded. "The woman father loved." "Tell me her name." Eleanor's voice wavered. "Her name was Clara. She worked here in this house long before you were born. She was everything I was not. Warm, fierce, unafraid of the truth." "Your father?" "He loved her in a way he never loved me. They had a child together, a boy." Daniel's breath caught. "A boy, where is he?" Her silence was more painful than words. Finally, she whispered, "Gone, erased by the family. Threatened, silenced, forced into the shadows." "Your father chose you, Daniel. Chose the marriage, the name, the empire. But a part of him never recovered. And neither did Clara." Daniel staggered back, his chest heaving. Another life, another heir, had been cast aside because he did not fit their image. A brother, perhaps alive somewhere, denied his birthright because of the color of his skin. The thought tore Daniel apart. "And you let it happen?" he asked, his voice shaking. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "I was young, trapped. They told me it was survival. That if I didn't go along, I would lose everything. I convinced myself I was protecting you, but now I see I was protecting myself. For the first time." Daniel saw his mother not as the unshakable matriarch, but as a woman crushed under the weight of choices she had made to survive. Choices that had destroyed others. He wanted to hate her, but what he felt instead was something worse. Pity. Althea entered the room, her presence quiet but unignorable. She had overheard enough. "This is what you've built your empire on?" she asked softly. Her voice wasn't angry, it was weary, as though centuries of injustice had landed on her shoulders all at once. Secrets, silence, and the bodies of people who were never allowed to exist? Daniel reached for her hand, desperate. It ends now, with us. I won't let them erase our child like they erased my brother. Althea looked at him, her eyes filled with both love and doubt. She wanted to believe him, but she knew the world outside that Study would not bend so easily. Men of his status had promised before. Promised love, promised protection. But when the weight of society pressed down, they folded. Do you know what you're saying, Daniel? She whispered. They will come after you. They will strip you of everything. Then let them, he said fiercely. I'd rather be a man with nothing than a coward with everything. But the fight arrived sooner than either of them expected. Days later, the board of his company staged an emergency meeting. The photographs were already circulating, Daniel walking hand in hand with Althea, her belly visible beneath her dress. The tabloids had their headlines. Heir to the Whitmore fortune. Caught in scandal with Maid, investors. Threatened to pull out. The press camped outside the estate gates. And the board, those men with polished shoes and soulless eyes, gave him a choice. Distance himself from Althea and the child, or lose his place as CEO. Daniel stood at the head of the long table, every eye drilling into him. He thought of Clara. He thought of the brother he had never known. And he thought of Althea, who carried his child with pride despite the cruelty around her. For the first time, his choice was clear. I won't abandon them, he said, his voice steady. If this company, this fortune, requires me to turn my back on love and truth, then I want no part of it. The room erupted in chaos. Voices shouted, papers slammed. But Daniel felt a strange calm settle over him. For the first time, he wasn't living for the Whitmore name. He was living for himself, for Althea, for their child. That night, when he returned to the estate, Althea met him at the door. He told her everything, the meeting, the ultimatum, his decision. She searched his face, looking for cracks, for hesitation. But all she found was resolve. You've given up everything, she whispered. No, he said, pulling her close. I finally found what matters. Yet even as he spoke the words, a shadow loomed. Because secrets like Eleanor's never stay buried. And the more Daniel defied the family, the closer those secrets crept toward the light. The truth about Clara, about the erased child, about the empire built on silenced voices, it was all rising to the surface. And when it broke, it would not only destroy his fortune, it might destroy them all. The storm broke on a cold morning when Daniel least expected it. He and Althea had spent the night speaking of the future, small things like names for the baby, a modest home away from the estate, a life built not on legacy but on love. For the first time in weeks, there was laughter. But when the sun rose, the gates of the Whitmore estate swarmed with reporters. Headlines screamed from every paper. Broadcast vans lined the street, and the truth that Eleanor had tried so desperately to bury had clawed its way out. A whistleblower from within the family, an estranged cousin who saw opportunity in betrayal, had leaked the story of Clara and the erased child. Alongside Daniel's scandal, the past was suddenly alive again, raw and unfiltered. The world was asking questions. Who was Clara? Where was the child? How many lives had been ruined by the Whitmore name? The empire Eleanor had guarded like a fortress was crumbling, and the world was demanding answers. Inside, Daniel faced his mother. She looked older than he had ever seen her, as though decades of secrecy had finally collapsed onto her shoulders. It's out, he said flatly. Everything you tried to protect, everything you sacrificed, it's all out there now. Eleanor's lips trembled. I told you this family's sins would eat us alive, and now they have. She sank into a chair, her hands shaking. For years, she had commanded rooms with a glance, but now she looked like a woman stripped of her armor. Daniel refused to pity her. You could have stopped this years ago. You could have spoken the truth before the lies devoured us all. But you chose silence. Her eyes flicked toward Althea, who stood quietly by the doorway, her presence dignified, her belly rounding with new life. And you think your love will protect her? Protect that child? Daniel, the world is crueler than you imagine. They will not forgive you, and they will not forgive her. Althea stepped forward, her voice steady and unflinching. I don't need their forgiveness. I don't need their permission to exist. I've lived every day of my life in a world that pretended I was invisible, and I've survived. My child will not grow up in shame. Not like Clara's. Eleanor's composure cracked. For the first time, she wept openly. Her tears were not only for herself, but for Clara. For the boy who had been denied his name, for the generations of pain stitched into their legacy. There's more, she whispered, barely audible. The child, your father's son, he didn't vanish, he lived. I heard whispers he was sent away, raised far from here under another name. He could still be out there, Daniel. You may have a brother. The words stunned him. The idea of a living sibling, erased by shame but still breathing somewhere in the world, sent a jolt through him. He wasn't just fighting for Althea and their child. He was fighting for all the voices that had been silenced by the Whitmore name. The following days were a battlefield. Daniel faced the press head-on, refusing to hide. Yes, he told them, standing on the steps of the estate, Althea by his side. She is the woman I love. She carries my child, and I will not abandon them. The truth about my family's past is painful, but it will no longer be buried. The Whitmore name will not continue on the backs of erased lives. The backlash was immediate. Investors pulled out, partners cut ties. The board voted him out as CEO. The empire Eleanor had sacrificed everything to protect crumbled within weeks, but Daniel felt lighter with every loss. Wealth had been a chain. Reputation had been a prison. Without them, he could finally breathe. Not everyone turned away. Across the city, people watched and some began to speak. Black communities who had lived in the shadow of powerful families recognized Clara's story as their own. For once, the Whitmore scandal was not just gossip. It was a mirror, reflecting centuries of injustice. Letters arrived, some condemning, others praising. Strangers sent messages of solidarity, and slowly, Daniel realized that though he had lost the world his family built, he had gained something far greater, truth. But truth alone could not erase pain. One evening, Althea found him sitting on the steps of their modest new home, staring into the distance. Do you regret it? She asked gently. He shook his head. No, I regret the years I lived blind. I regret the silence that destroyed lives. But not this, not you, not our child. His hand reached to her belly, feeling the faintest kick. This is the only legacy I want to leave. Eleanor visited once near the end of winter. She looked frail, as though the unraveling of the empire had taken her last strength. She held Althea's hand with trembling fingers, tears spilling down her cheeks. I failed Clara, I failed her son, but maybe I can be different now. Maybe I can be better for this child. Althea studied her, searching for sincerity. Finally, she nodded. Then be present. Not as a matriarch. Not as a Whitmore. Just as a grandmother. Eleanor wept into Althea's arms. Her power stripped, her pride broken, but her humanity at last visible. Months later, when the baby was born, Daniel held his daughter for the first time. Her skin was soft, her cry fierce, her presence undeniable. In her tiny face, he saw both the past and the future. The buried pain of Clara, the resilience of Althea, and the chance to finally break the cycle. He kissed her forehead and whispered, You will never be erased. You will never be hidden. You are the truth. And you are loved. The world outside still whispered, still judged, but inside that small home, something far greater thrived. Not wealth, not legacy, but dignity, love, and the promise that no matter how heavy the past, the future could be rewritten. And so, the man who was once a millionaire heir stood no longer as a prisoner of his name, but as a father, a partner, and a man who chose courage over silence. The Whitmore empire was gone, but something new had risen in its place, something stronger, something unbreakable. A family built on truth,